Today's daf is daf Lamed Beis. Let's just review the Gemara's kasha that Ula is going to come to answer on daf Lamed Aleph Lamed Beis. The Gemara presents a stira between two mishnayos. Our mishnah that says Habal Achoso etc. is Chayiv Knas, and yet the mishnah in Makkah says Habal Achoso is Chayiv Malkus. How could our mishnah say that Habal Achoso collects a knas if he's chayv malchus? Because we have a principle that kim maybe the ramine, either you get malchus or you get mamon, you don't get both. So how could he pay knas if he's chayv malchus? Omar ulo kash kan beachoso nara v'kan beachoso bogeres. Let's start backwards. In the case of the Mishnah in Makos, we're talking about a bogeres. A bogeres does not get knas, and therefore, in the absence of knas, is a chiv malchus, and that's why the Mishnah in Makkah says that they get malchus. Our Mishnah here, on the other hand, in Ksubas, is talking about a case of a nara. A nara gets knas, and Ula holds, and this is going to be a big deal for today's sugya, that in the case we have an overlap of mamon and malchus, you pay the mamon, and you're exempt from the malchus. And that's called Mishalem Mamon V'Eino Loke. I will soon see the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who disagrees and holds that you get Malchus and you don't get Mamon. But Ula holds you pay Mamon, and that exempts you from Malchus. Now, one of the issues that perhaps this hinges upon is which is more chamor, paying Mamon or getting malchus. And intuitively, we would have said malchus is more chomer, so we would have certainly assumed that in an overlap between mamon and malchus, he should get malchus and be parted from the lower echelon obligation of paying mamon. But Ula puts the mamon on the top level, and it knocks off the malchus. Kumar raises the following objection to Ula: Bachoso bogeres nami. You can't tell me that in the case of bogeres there is no payment of mamon, although there's no knas, but ika boshes upagam, and therefore there's a chiv tashlumin towards mazik, not midin knas as a penalty, rather as a compensation for boshes and pagam, which are two of the chiyuve compensation. Like for example, in chovel, you're chayiv for boshes. And in the case of Be'ila, you're chayiv for Pagam as well. And therefore, the Mishnah in Makkah still remains difficult according to Ula, because even if you assume the Mishnah is referring to Achos HaBogeres, still there's a Chiv Mamon, and that Chiv Mamon should knock off the Malchus according to Ula, because Ula says when there's an overlap and one action is machai both mamon and malchus, then you get mamon and you don't get malchus. So the Gemara answers b'shota. We're talking about a woman who does not suffer boshes ubagam because she doesn't have any value, so to speak, on the shuk. You wouldn't buy her as a shivcha. She's a shota, and she doesn't have any boshes either. So the Gemara asks for ika tzara. But even if she's a shota, there's still a monetary payment, compensation for tsar. And the Gemara answers b'mafuta. Now, mafuta would be an answer that would cover all the other issues that we said before. Mafuta means that since she approved and consented to the maisa, therefore is an implicit mechila. She cannot approve of the maisa and then turn around and sue for damages. So the Gemara says, "Hashtadios afilu temachoso nara v'yisoma mafuta." Now we'll emphasize in a minute why the Gemara adds the word yisoma. But before we get to that, we're talking now about replacing the other answers. We didn't need bogeres and we didn't need shota. We could have nara and we could have a pikachas. However, if you ask me why is there no tashlume mamon, the answer is because she's a mafuta, and a mafuta is an implicit machila. The only problem is she has a father, and if she's a nara, her father collects these monies, and therefore she has no right to be mochel on monies that accrue to our father, which is really fascinating when you think about it, because we're talking about an act of pitui, and yet the father has rights to collect the monies for that pitui, even though she was mocheles. But we sort of completely bracket her. We sort of take her out of the picture because the monies go to the father. But therefore, the Gemara says we talk about a yisoma. A father is gone; he has no rights to any mammon. Any mammon that has to be paid now goes to her directly. And in the case of Mafuta, she was mocheles. So now the Gemara goes into an analysis of Ula himself. Ula says that when there's an overlap of Mammon and Malchus, you pay the Mammon and you're exempt for the Malchus. Alma, Kasavar Ula Kol Hecha Deika Mammon Malchus, Mammon Mishalim Milka Lo Loki, Minola La Ula Ha. What is the scriptural basis for Ula's conclusion? That's the Mammon that is Gover. The Mammon knocks off the Malchus and not the other way around. And as we said before, intuitively, we would have thought just the opposite of Ula, that we give him the more severe of the two punishments, he should be getting Malchus and not Mammon. And first, the Gemara tries to make an attempt to derive it from Chavola. In Chavola, the Torah is talking about an overlap of both a violation of a lav, the Torah says Pen Yosef, from which we derive the conclusion that Amakes Chavero, Loke, a person who hits his friend, will have violated the law of Baltosif, and therefore he gets Malchus for violating the law. But at the same time, the Torah says, Ayin Tachas Ayin, etc., which Chazal interpret to be Mammon, that Achov Chaver pays Mammon. Now, in the case of Chovel B'Chavero is Ika Mammon, the Ika Malchus, and Mammon Mishalim Milka Lo Loki. How does Ula know that in the overlap of Mammon and Malchus in Chovel B'Chavero, he pays and he doesn't get Malchus? Because the pasuk says, Rak Shivto Yitain V'Rapo Yirapa, which means he has to pay him for unemployment. The Nechbal, the victim, couldn't go to work. He has to pay him for medical expenses, etc. And obviously, it means that he's getting a Chiv Mammon. And when there's a Chiv Mammon, there's no Malchus. Af kol hecha de ika. Now, Chovel B'Chaver becomes the paradigmic case. It becomes the binyan av, from which you derive that Mamona Mishalim Milka Lo Loki, that the Chiv Mammon knocks off the Chiv Malchus. The Gemara is assuming at this point that every case of Chovel B'Chavero is Chayav Malchus. And if there's a Chiv Mammon as well, it means that the Chavola engendered a loss of at least a minimum of a Shava Pruta, then he pays that Shava Pruta and he doesn't get Malchus. So the Mammon exempts him from Malchus, and this becomes a Binyan Av, from which you derive a universal principle that called Hecha Dika Mammon Malchus, Mamona Mishalim Milka Lo Loki. The Gemara says, wait a minute, maybe the Torah was being particularly strict and severe with the Chovel. In fact, no other mazik except for Chovel incurs a 5-branch penalty. Ma Chovel b'Chavero shekein chay b'chamisha dvarim michayim nezek tziv tzar ripu shavas hapoches. And you see how machmir the Torah was if you physically injure your friend, and therefore the Torah says, let him pay mammon and be off with Malchus. However, the Gemara now vacillates. We're not sure that Mammon is more chomer than Malchus. So if the Torah wants to be machmir in Chavola, maybe the Torah should have said he should get Malchus and not Mammon. The Gemara answers, Ima Moda Lakula. So if you'll say that the Torah was more makil in Chavola, and it could be in general, Malchus, lucky, Moda Lomashad. But Chavola becomes the exception to the rule, and the Torah was more lenient in the case of Chavola. Why was the Torah lenient in the case of Chavola? Shekain huta mechlolo bebezd. This lav is called a lav shehuta mechlolo. Any lav that under certain particular circumstances you violate the same maisa, and yet you're allowed to do so, that makes it huta mechlolo, the allowance, the leniency in which the Torah gives you license to do that very same action, indicates that it's a lower level lav. It's called utar michlolo. An example of that would be the Easter of Chadash Limizbeach after the 16th of Nisan, before Chag HaShavuos. That's called Huta Michlol, because the Easter Chadash Lehedjot was already lifted, and you're left with the remnants of the Easter Chadash Limizbeach. That's called Huta Michlol. So now we have the following, that Ula is now in trouble, so to speak. We do not have a clear-cut source from which we derive Ula's conclusion that in the case of an overlap moment of Malchus, he pays the moment and he's exempt from the Malchus. Ella, so the Gemara says, Ula Gomar mi Edim Zomim. Edim Zomim is also an overlap of both a Chiv Mammon and a Chiv Malchus, because every case of Edim Zomim, when he purges himself in Bezdin, he violates the law of Lo Tana Berecha Choka. And for that law, he should get Malchus. However, the Torah says, Vasisam Lo Kasha Zomim Lasus Liochet. So if two Edom testify that Reuven owed Shimon 100, and then they were Muzam, these two Edom will have to pay Reuven 100, and they don't get Malchus. Gomar, the Edom Zomim, the Torah says that Vasisam Lo Kasha Zomim Lasus Liochet has to pay money. Edom Zomim Ika Mamon, Malchus. So the Mammon will completely trump the Malchus. So we found in Eidim Tzomimim the paradigmic case of an overlap, and the Torah says you pay and you're exempt from Malchus. Gemara says, wait a minute, maybe the Torah is being exceptionally strict in the case of Edom Zomim. I'll show you and I'll prove to you that the Torah is machmer in the violation of this lav in a way that all other lavim would not be a violation. In order to get punished for a violation of a lav, you need a hasra, but not so in the case of Edom Zomim. It's a whole sugya as to why Edom Zomim do not need hasra. But again, we have that other side, that paying moment means a leniency. Why do the Edom Zomim, who are so machmir that they're in violation of and kasha zomim, they get punished without hasra? Why should we make an Edom Zomim? Shekain lo asu ma'isa. Edom Zomim did no action physically; they only spoke. So again, we're back to square one. We don't have a clear-cut paradigmic source for Ula's conclusion that with an overlap of Mammon and Malchus, you pay Mammon and you're exempt from Malchus. Elegomar Nitravayim. Try to do a tzad shava between these two cases of Chovel and Edom Zomim. Malik tzad shava shemendika Mammon and Malchus, Mammon and Mishalim Milkalo Lucky, Afkol Hechdika Mammon and Malchus, Mammon and Mishalim Milkalo Lucky. If we join forces in these two cases, then you don't have a pircha, because any pircha that you have, the other one will come and plug up that pircha. But the Gemara says that there's a pircha that's common to both of them, and that is Malatzad Shav Shabem Shekain Yesh Batzad Chomor. And the Chumra in the case of Chovel is Chayv Chamish Dvarim. The Chumra in the case of Edom Zomim, he doesn't require Asra. But that's again assuming that Mammon is more Chomer than Malchus. Ve'i Mammon L'Kulo is Shekain Yesh Bem Tad HaKula, that both of them in common have a Kula. The Kula in the case of Chovel is that Huta Mechlolo Eitzel Bezdin, right? Because Bezdin will give him a chavola, as it says, Vaya ben Hakos as Harasha, and the Kula Edom Zomim is that it's deeper without a mice. But now we finish with Lamed Aleph, Amud Beis, and we go on to the next